Hello everyone, Leaf Reed here, and today we have Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. So, I picked this up in my local bookstore. Funnily enough, I actually met Peterson when he was still teaching at U of T, and I just came into his office and just, shook his hand and, whatever, and said, "Oh, I appreciate what you're doing." He's like, "Yeah, whatever." It's like, "Yeah, no, it's," and he says, "Oh, yeah, no, it's good. I've got mostly positive feedback." The thing that was surprising about Jordan Peterson in person is he's really tall. He's like, I'm 6'2". He's probably like 7 feet. He's like he's a full head taller than me for sure. So 12 Rules for Life. What is it exactly? Well, it's a guidebook for just general life advice, kind of uncover the obvious things that we've forgotten in our busy daily lives. That goes back, however long. What's interesting about it, though, is he kind of just borrowed and stole all of these questions and answers from the internet, but in a creative way, where he basically said, okay, so he went to, I think it's called Quora, which is like a question website, and he took the top 12 things, the most commented on posts on that website, and wrote about each of those topics. And some of them are not very interesting, and some of them are, because you really explore, why do we do the things we do? Why do we think the way we think? And kind of exploring those ideas and grabbing a conclusion that you can practically apply to your life. That's important. And that's what I do like about Jordan Peterson. He's very practical. He's like, okay, let's find something that can help, because he's backgrounds in psychiatry. So he dealt with people who had mental issues and logic that made no sense, and trying to give them a tool or a method that is beyond logic, that allows them to rationalize or understand something, and allows them to do what they need to get done and live a normal life. And of course, he became popular because he fought against the left-wing sort of diktats in his university. There's just a foreword, I'll read it. And so a generation has been raised untutored in what was once called aptly practical wisdom, which guided previous generations. Millennials, often told they have received the finest education available anywhere, have actually suffered from a form of serious intellectual and moral neglect. The relativists of my generation and Jordan's, many of whom became their professors, chose to devalue thousands of years of human knowledge about how to acquire virtue, dismissing it as passé, not relevant, or even oppressive. They were so successful at it that the very word virtue sounds out of date, and someone using it appears anachronistically moralistic and self-righteous. And so that's, I think, Miss Paglia, Jordan's friend and peer, talking there. And that's kind of the issue with the modern day politics, really, which is why he became so popular. That the education system is filled with relativists, and that, well, what you think is objectivity and truth and morality and virtue might not be someone else's depiction of it, and that there is no real objective standard for which we can aim for, just everyone's whatever. And it's a bringing down of hierarchies and structures. And Jordan talks a lot about hierarchies, and not only social hierarchies, but especially almost like the mental hierarchies, the psychosocial hierarchies that have existed in our brains since the dawn of time. And that's about the lobster, which we're about to get into. But yeah, it's an interesting debate against, about hierarchies and oppression. And if you're lower on the hierarchy, is that warrant to destroy those above you, or clamor for, raising yourself up on that said hierarchy, without and it's asking for society to do that rather than doing it yourself. And so there's an argument against independence and and social kind of social charity, I guess, social justice, what they consider to be injustice if you're really low on that totem pole. And so, of course, Jordan is preaching a message of self-reliance, self-independence. It doesn't matter how or where you are in the social hierarchy. If you end up in a psych ward, which is where his profession is, you need help. And he's treated everyone from all walks of life, poor people, rich people, people of different backgrounds, faiths, perspectives, outlooks on life, and trying to find a common thread that makes them all begin to see a proper way to live and just deal with reality as it is, rather than looking and calling out for a savior from some area. But anyway, so we have rule 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back. And so this is kind of what he's been known for and memed on, is that he's the lobster guy, because he talks about how the anatomy or the taxonomy, the behavior of lobsters is such that the males will portray themselves and walk and act in a certain way in which they expose the sensitive areas of their body, or they expose their whole body to the public around them. And they kind of show their bravado through their own appearance. And the successful males of any species in the animal kingdom also portray similar traits. So he's saying you need to be comfortable with yourself, with your body, with your self-image, and portray confidence even if you think you don't have any, because even just portraying it and making it up in your head and being slightly delusional about it is actually just as good as actually having it. Just like, crazy guys who go skydiving or think they won't die or get hurt or something. I'll give a little excerpt here, since this is the beginning one. If you are like most people, you don't often think about lobsters unless you're eating one. However, these interesting and delicious crustaceans are very much worth considering. Their nervous systems are comparatively simple, with large, easily observable neurons, the magic cells of the brain. Because of this, scientists have been able to map the neural circuitry of lobsters very accurately. This has helped us understand the structure and function of the brain and behavior of more complex animals, including human beings. Lobsters have more in common with you than you might think, particularly when you are feeling crabby. Haha. It actually says that. So, first of all, his writing style is actually very easy to get along with. It's very kind of jovial, off the cuff, not too heavy-handed and serious. And I think my favorite thing about him is that he tries to bring these concepts down to a understandable level that, like, a Canadian coast-to-coast motorcycle thug could understand. The most basic guy can get it, and it rings true very easily. It's not clouded up by prose and worded language. It's clear and distilled, and it has to be if you're going to be a psychiatrist, and you have to help the average day person and not just deal with these ideas in the sky kind of thing. And so it's all about the actual structure of the brain, of the nervous system, of territory and whatever, and how it functions, and how the hierarchies, the social hierarchy of who is the biggest lobster, who is the strongest lobster, who is the alpha lobster, is the successful lobster. And there's ways to do that, and you should, aim to be the best that you can be, and not to be overbearing, but at least to aim to be strong, and not be okay with being weak and complaining and being complacent, saying, oh, woe is me, I can't do anything. No, there's a way to get out of that, and you have to believe in yourself and have confidence in yourself. And when you have confidence, your shoulders will go back, or if you put your shoulders back, you will get the confidence you didn't know you had. He talks about, economic inequality, where, the top 1% have as much loot as the bottom 50%, and where the richest 85 people have as much as the bottom 3.5 billion. It's a winner takes all game in the lobster world and the human world. Again, you see this with, classical music. You have hundreds, thousands of composers throughout history, but Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, and Tchaikovsky were almost all the music played in the modern orchestra. The majority of scientific papers are published by a very small group of scientists. And he says the average state of things is essentially unequal distribution. It's at the very best are rewarded with everything, basically. And it's not saying that's how it should be. That's saying that's how it is, and we need to deal with that predicament. And he does go on to say that that is also can be a very unhealthy thing, because then if the highest and top area hoard everything to the extent where everyone else is suffering, you get things like the French Revolution, for example. This means that dominant hierarchies have been an essentially permanent feature of the environment to which all complex life has adapted. A third of a billion years ago, brains and nervous systems were comparatively simple. Nonetheless, they already had the structure and neurochemistry necessary to process information about status in society. The importance of this fact can hardly be overstated. So it really is a struggle of, the fight against the classical, natural way things are, and the idealists who wish it wasn't that way and want to force it to be that way in a method that is destructive and doesn't actually work. And so Peterson is just pointing out, look, this is how things actually work. These are the rules. You can't be delusional and hope that they change. They've been written out for us, and I think he sees more and more that people want to bend the rules of nature for themselves. And he's saying, look, you just can't, and this is just how it is. It doesn't mean you should be idealistic to some extent and aim for things to be better, but to have a total hatred and demonization of what is a natural process, that you can't fight and win that. You cannot fight and win a 350 million old structure that's part of life and nature. And we have to grapple with that. And we've been grappling with it and improving it ever since, the dawn of man. And we've had terrible ages where disease was rampant, wars, famine, and all awful things were just commonplace. And slowly over time, we've gotten to this point where things are now much easier, but it's almost like that past trauma of death and surviving and barely surviving through harsh conditions. That concept is still with us, and there are people who still feel like if they don't get what they need, they will die, which is understandable. Down it says evolution is a building on of every step. It builds one thing, it builds an eye, it builds a cortex, it builds a pupil. It all builds on top of past things. That's how evolution works. And so, following that logic to kind of come and say on a social or biological extent that it's all wrong and the foundations are wrong and they need to be pulled out is a kind of insanity that only a crazy or traumatized person could come up with. Standing up physically also implies and evokes and demands standing up metaphysically. You may be able to accept the terrible burden of the world and find joy. Look for your inspiration to the victorious lobster with its 350 million years of practical wisdom. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. And then I'll quickly just go through the rest of these. Rule 2, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. And there you see the image there. I actually really like this one because I had never thought of this before. I've never seen it in media or whatever, but he just points out very simply, why is it that we take more care of our animals and our pets more than ourselves sometimes? We'll feed our cat, but we might skip a meal. We'll give our dog his medication, but we'll forget our own. We care more about the things around us because they give us purpose and sustain us. And that purpose in a way is more important than ourselves, but it shouldn't be like that, should it? I mean, it's kind of like, why should the master and the more capable owner and caretaker for this creature be in worse condition than that creature? If we're responsible, or should we not be more responsible and a role model for it? And so he says sometimes we get distracted from ourselves, but ultimately on a psychological level, and I think this is so true for so many things, that you need to view yourself as someone you need to take care of. That as if, honestly, if you have a higher spirit looking down at this human body and saying, okay, how do I take care of this person as you look in the mirror? That's basically what I got out of that. And honestly, it's a great argument. It's like, it's true. I don't have an argument against it. I should take care of myself. We should take care of ourselves and treat ourselves almost as like in the third person, as weird as that sounds. And it's a really interesting mind change. So if you're ever like, I don't know, procrastinating, worried about doing something, just think to yourself, how do I take care of myself? How can I make, whatever your name is, do that? It's a really weird trick, and I think it works. It's funny. And I highlight this. As Jung points out, this means embracing and loving the sinner who is yourself, as much as forgiving and aiding someone else who is stumbling and imperfect. Yeah, it's like the whole thing when they talk about accepting yourself, it means accepting the bad side of yourself, not as bad, but as just part of you. And this goes into more in Jung and the undiscovered conscious, or whatever it's called, that you need to kind of just look at yourself and not say this is bad and I don't want it. You have to say it's bad and I need to just deal with it. And then it won't scare you anymore, and then you can just move on with dealing with it. If it's a eating issue, weight issue, addiction issue, just practical stuff. I love it. Oh yeah, rule 3, make friends with people who want the best for you. And there we have a picture of David, the statue. And yeah, and so the rest of these kind of less interesting. But yeah, it's like your friends are a reflection of who you are. If you associate with people you don't like, or people that you're just hanging out for charity, those people will affect you. You will start to copy their mannerisms and begin to be influenced by them, even if you don't want to. And if you think less of them, that's even worse. So yeah, I mean, he just kind of goes on an anecdote. I think about like a motorcycle gang guy who got in with the wrong crowd. If you get in with the wrong crowd, the crowd is going to get in with you. And it's literally like the time you spend with people is going to be a reflection. Maybe you are saving someone because you're a strong, generous, well put together person who wants to do the right thing. But it's also possible, and perhaps more likely, that you just want to draw attention to your own exhaustible reserves of compassion and goodwill. Or maybe you're saving someone because you want to convince yourself that the strength of your character is more than just a side effect of your luck and birthplace. Or maybe you have no plan, genuine or otherwise, to rescue anybody. You're associating with people who were bad for you not because it's better for anyone, but because it's easier. You know it. Your friends know it. You're all bound by an implicit contract once aimed at nihilism and failure and suffering of the stupidest sort. You've all decided to sacrifice the future to the present, and you don't talk about it. He's dealt with the real people. He's dealt with the real stuff. Maybe your misery is the weapon you brandish in your hatred for those who rose upward while you waited around and sank. Man, it's brutal. It's so brutal, and it rings true. The people who allow I mean the way I see it, it's like a Cain and Abel situation. Cain just sits around and is morose, and he looks at Abel like, oh, he's doing so well for himself. I don't even want to try to do that. It's very sad too, but it's very poignant. Here's something to consider. If you have a friend whose friendship you wouldn't recommend to your sister or your father or your son, why would you have such a friend yourself? It really makes you think. Rule 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to someone else today. So this is basically a pretty good technique. I think a better technique or a metaphor that I could think of it is that basically you always want to be improving and you always want to be going forward, obviously. And we just fall into this trap of looking at someone else and they have their lives together. And we just think they're so great and I'm so awful. And that's especially true with social media. You only see the best side of someone. So there's a whole generation where they feel like they need to be perfect in every possible way. A better way, I would say, a better metaphor I've heard than this book is that it's like you're driving in your own lane. And sometimes your lane is slow, sometimes your lane is fast, but that is your lane. When you see, I don't know, I used to have insecurity about people who had things I didn't. And I used to be like, oh, wow, I'm going to be, I'm going to have that one day, or I'm going to be jealous if I don't. And now it's like, I see it and I'm like, I mean, that's you. That's like your relationship. That's your child. That's your investment that you made. And once you just make it a thing of like, we are nothing alike and I just need to focus on my own qualities and standards and natural abilities, I don't know, it's nice. It's just like, yeah, like I just need to be better for myself. And everyone has their own skills and capabilities. Some people don't have high IQs. They are going to have a harder time. But every day, if you can just improve a little bit on something you're doing, that's the human existence, the experience, that you just constantly keep improving yourself on the same nature or thing that you're good at. You have a nature. You can play the tyrant to it, but you will certainly rebel. How hard can you force yourself to work and sustain your desire to work? How much can you sacrifice to your partner before generosity turns to resentment? What is it that you actually love? What is it that you genuinely want? Before you can articulate your own standards of value, you must see yourself as a stranger, and then you must get to know yourself. What do you find valuable or pleasurable? Rule 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. So this one is more so like, if they're going to do something that you aren't going to like them for it, and I guess this relates in relationships as well, if they're going to go and do something that you are just like, I'm not okay with that, you need to articulate it, and you need to at least try to make it not happen, or like talk with them about it. Because if we just sit back and allow people to do the things that we don't like, and they don't know that, that's the fastest way to deteriorate any relationship, a parent, a child, a spouse, anything. That one's kind of just straightforward. And it's kind of like, yes, communicating in relationship with what to say, but specifically, if they're doing something you do not like, tell them before they do it or as they're doing it. Do not wait and be like, oh, well, I really like you, but so I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not going to tell you what you did wrong. It's like, no, you gotta tell them. Gotta tell them. Tell them how it is. Oh, and talks about, the divorce laws changed in the 1960s, and then the hypothetical horrors and destruction of families and children's lives that took place because of it. If a child has not been taught to behave properly by the age of 4, it will forever be difficult for him or her to make friends. The research literature is quite clear on this. So yeah, the whole point of kindergarten and all that stuff, you need to socialize your child. That's just like a stat that he does with early childhood development. Rule 6, put your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. So again, he says this, basically this is the clean your room chapter. This is basically saying you should not have grounds to criticize someone unless you can provide an example from yourself or honestly from someone else. If you can, I don't know, I'm thinking of movies or things right now. If you can look at a movie and say it's bad and they say why, you should be able to point to another movie that did something similar and did it better. Or you make your own movie, but of course not many people do that, obviously. Before you tear someone down, it's kind of like you need to build up something for yourself so that you're not just arguing ideals and theoreticals. There's something practical and real that you're objectively aiming for. And that happens a lot in, I guess, political situations where if only we had this program, it would fix all these problems. If only this was like this, and without considering, well, it might backfire, it might cause a new problem, it might do this. I don't know, the thing I thought of, they introduced like the cane toad in Australia to hunt all of the bugs and pests and vermin that were eating the cane sugar or the crops or whatever. And now they were so effective, they've eaten all the bugs and they've reproduced so much that now they're the pests and the problem, and they have to run over them on the highway, apparently. But yeah, there's just the concept that I really applied quite a few years ago, that there's basically nothing more valuable than experience. Even if it's a bad experience, okay, I don't like that thing for these reasons. And then there's something else that's very similar and you'd be like, oh yeah, no, that thing is also bad. And it's because I did this thing and it was bad for these reasons. And those exact same reasons are on this other thing, even though it's called something else. Experience is the only thing that matters in life because it's just tacit wisdom. You know that this food tastes bad. You are not going to try it again, or whatever. Or the experiences that we have make up our objective power of judgment. And that's why young people think they know everything until suddenly things get real and they're like, oh no. Rule 7, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. And so that one is basically, it reminds me actually of the quote by Marcus Aurelius that says, if your life is chaotic, do only what is necessary. And so there's plenty of things that we feel like we have to do, but we don't really need to. You have to eat, you have to sleep, but all these extra little things, distractions, you don't need to do them. Life is suffering, that's clear. There is no more basic, irrefutable truth. It's basically what God tells Adam and Eve immediately before he kicks them out of paradise. It might even be time to sacrifice what you love best so that you can become who you might become instead of staying who you are. Extreme, nothing greater can be imagined. That's the very definition of archetypical. That's the core of what constitutes religious. So the most extreme form of something, the purest form of something, the quiddity of it, becomes an archetype. And he says that's what religion is. It's all of those symbols and forms and the most extreme examples. Oh yeah, and he quotes Carl Jung here. This is my favorite Jung quote. No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And we're all in that spectrum. We're all sliding between heaven and hell, good and evil, the stupid little devil and angel on our shoulders. That's like a real thing, basically. Rule 8, tell the truth or at least don't lie. And he basically said, no one's ever gotten away with a lie because it's psychologically something that catches up to you and you have to confront it anyway. And yeah, it's denial of the self, denial of the truth, denial of reality, which is rooted in pride. Rule 9, assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. There it is with, looks like Plato and Aristotle. I mean, that's very simple, understanding, always be open-minded. It's pride and arrogance that stops us from learning from one another and teaching one another. Each person can speak up for himself only after he has first restated the ideas and feelings of the previous speaker accurately to that speaker's satisfaction. If you are called upon to summarize someone's position so that the speaking person agrees with the summary, you may have to state the argument even more clearly and succinctly. So this is kind of saying that, instead of just arguing against walls and against each other, instead kind of cooperate and instead create a zone where we are able to fully understand what's being said and then reciprocate properly. Rule 10, be precise with your speech. There it is there. And again, very straightforward, articulate, learn to say the words that you want to say, articulate what you mean, and you speak better when you read, actually, and you learn new words in which you can produce new ideas clearly and succinctly. That's Rule 11, do not bother children when they are skateboarding. It's kind of an interesting one. So basically saying it's the way that kids, and mostly boys, triumph over danger. If there are kids going out and embracing the unknown, the chaos, pushing themselves, the worst thing you can do is reel them back and fight against their nature, which is to put themselves in danger's way in order to prove themselves and find out their limits. Thus, if things are made too safe, people, including children, start to figure out ways to make them dangerous again. Which I think is so funny, that the inner chaos and desire for challenge will manifest in some way, shape, or form. And he talks a lot about how the Soviet purges of the kulaks and the Holodomor were essentially part of this resentment. That any sort of wealth signified oppression, that private property was theft, and it was time for some equity. More than 30,000 kulaks were shot on the spot. Many more met their fate at the hands of their most jealous, resentful, and unproductive neighbors, who used the high ideals of communist collectivization to mask their murderous intent. The fact that such statements lead immediately to internal inconsistencies within ideology is never addressed. Gender is constructed, but an individual who desires gender reassignment surgery is to be unarguably considered a man trapped in a woman's body or vice versa. The fact that both of these cannot logically be true simultaneously is just ignored or rationalized away with the appalling postmodern claim that logic itself and the techniques of science are merely part of an oppressive patriarchal system. And finally, Rule 12, pat a cat when you encounter one on the street. There's one right there. Being of any reasonable sort appears to require limitation. Perhaps this is because being requires becoming as well as mere static existence, and to become is to become something more. And then there's an afterword, and that's it. And then we have a picture of Jordan there himself. Anyway, a Canadian icon for, good or bad. 12 Views for Life, really good actually. I would really recommend this. I think the first few really hit really hard. They make us think in ways we hadn't thought about before. But the rest of them are not so much as interesting, or they're kind of just offshoot points for Jordan to talk about the hypocrisy of certain ideologies, how they're rooted in lies, and what, from a historical context, is not talked about a lot, like the Holodomor and the purges of the Soviet Union. So But all in all, this is a great book. It gives you lots of exposure to a lot of different topics. And what I just like about Jordan's writing style is that he will take a very simple analogy from nature or his personal life or his practice, which is dealing with people's problems and insecurities all the time, and he'll apply it to an event or to a technique or to an idea. And that's actually useful and practical. And that's just a good sense that, you know, we can learn from other people's mistakes and stories and from nature itself as well. Yeah, I don't know, great book. I would highly recommend it. It's, you know, medium length. It's not short. It's not super long, but I think it's just right. Really great thinker, really fascinating to read, and it's a good book. It's a good book. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and as always, keep reading.